Our program will now begin. Please welcome the esteemed panelists for today's session.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our conversation today on Energy is Infrastructure as part of the Policymakers Symposium during the 2021 National Clean Energy Week. We're really pleased that you all could join us. I'm Lisa Jacobson, and I am proud to serve as the president of the Business Council for Sustainable Energy. The Business Council is a broad-based clean energy trade association representing companies and trade associations in the energy efficiency, natural gas, renewable energy, energy storage, and sustainable transportation sectors. BCSE is pleased to be a long-standing supporter of National Clean Energy Week. It is a one-of-a-kind platform that brings together business leaders, advocates, and policymakers from all perspectives who are dedicated to advancing clean energy. Climate and clean energy are issues on the forefront of both the national and international agenda this year, and discussions like these are more relevant than ever. We are joined today by a distinguished panel of energy leaders. John DeStasio, President of the Large Public Power Council, Patrick DeCoste, President and CEO of Boralex Incorporated, Stacy Lawson, Vice Chairman and Board of the Directors, Stacy Lawson, she is Vice Chairman of the Board of Directors for Y Green, and Malcolm Wolf, who's President and CEO of the National Hydropower Association. This session is focused on the message that energy is infrastructure. And this topic is top of mind for us all as we face the impacts of a changing climate head on. And we also have a unique opportunity this year to pass federal policies to help reduce our nation's emissions and improve the resilience and reliability of our infrastructure. BCSE has made this message our clarion call with the launch of a Clean Energy is Infrastructure campaign this summer. I encourage you all to check it out on the BCSE website and get involved. As we convene today, Congress and the Biden administration are negotiating the legislative pathway to enact the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill, or the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, as well as negotiate a reconciliation package that is expected to include critical energy provisions. Through the discussion today, our panelists will share the investments that are most urgently needed and the policies that can help create a more efficient process to build out our nation's infrastructure. Key to this is leveraging private sector dollars and actions, as well as alignment with local, state, and national policies. A warm welcome to our panelists. And to get us started, I'd like to pose a question to all of you. We hear a great deal about the need to upgrade and modernize our nation's infrastructure. Please tell me a little bit about what that means to you and to your company or organization. How does energy fit in? And what are the most urgent priorities to build out our nation's infrastructure? John, let's start with you, and then we'll hear from Stacy, Patrick, and Malcolm. John?
Great. Thank you, Lisa. And thank you to everybody in the audience or tuning in virtually today. As was mentioned, I'm John DeStasio. I'm the president of the Large Public Power Council, and in that role, I represent 27 of the largest municipals in the United States. So we're 27 members, 21 states plus Puerto Rico, and we serve collectively about 30 million consumers. We're all actively engaged and involved in clean energy transition, decarbonization. We're very pleased to be part of this event. Our priorities are really informed by some of the regional opportunities that we have relative to resources, relative to demographics, relative to the things that occur across the many states that we cover. The one thing I will say, though, is that's very important is being municipal entities, we're particularly interested in ensuring that we have comparability. Many things are delivered as incentives through the tax code, and we're not-for-profit municipal issuers, so it's very important for us to be able to have comparability in terms of support for the investments that we want to make in clean energy. Most of our members are operating under local or regional or state decarbonization or clean energy goals. Now we're having this discussion federally, and we're very much interested in ensuring that the outcomes become clear. There's flexibility to recognize regional differences, and that we have the means to pay for it on a comparable basis in terms of monetizing incentives.
Great, thank you, John. I guess I'm next in line here. And thank you, Lisa, and everyone for being here today. This is a really important discussion. And I'm Stacy Lawson, Vice Chairman of Why Green Energy Fund. We are a clean energy finance company working under a very successful public-private partnership policy model called PACE, or Property Assessed Clean Energy. We provide scale capital to upgrade our country's built environment, so residential, commercial, industrial, agricultural infrastructure for energy efficiency, renewables, and climate resiliency. The PACE program started as a very simple policy concept in Berkeley many years ago, and has now been enabled through enabling legislation passed in 34 states, and has provided nearly 10 billion in clean energy and resiliency investments over the last 10 years. I'm delighted to say there's a very robust market and large demand by property owners for financing to take control of their energy futures. And Why Green alone has completed over 100,000 energy upgrade projects and placed nearly 3 billion in capital. So I would say that PACE is truly a story of innovative policy that has taken off and has the potential to change our energy future in positive ways. As it relates to our priorities for our nation's infrastructure, it's common that when we think of infrastructure, we think of things like what John is doing, like very large transmission and distribution systems, power plants, bridges, et cetera. But sometimes what's missed in the policy discussion is the aggregate impact of distributed resources. So the end use behind the meter, energy efficiency, renewable energy, water conservation, improvements that taken collectively can have a huge impact on reducing strain on the grid and bringing more infrastructure resiliency. 70% of electricity is consumed in the built environment. The more investment that we can mobilize to retrofit our built environment, the homes, businesses, industries across the nation, and create those efficiencies, the more resilient our grid and water systems will be, and that's where PACE plays. So thanks for having us here today.
Patrick, we'd love to hear from you next.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Stacy, and thank you, everybody. I'm very happy to be here. I am the president and CEO of Boralex. Boralex is a Canadian-based company, but we are 30 years old in renewable, and we are more than 20 years old in the US. And we have decided years ago to accelerate in the US because we were thinking that all the experience we have had in Canada and in France developing renewable electricity, we can use it in the US and specifically in the state of New York as a first step in the US market to develop a project, solar project, utility scales project. And I agree with Stacy, we will need the support of big project and small project, behind the meter project and large project like we are doing in solar, in wind, in hydro maybe, and certainly in storage too. So that thing being said, that we have more than in 3 years we have developed more than 1 gigawatt pipeline, 1,000 megawatt of project here in the state of New York, and we have already obtained 200 megawatt of contract, and we are very confident and optimistic because the U.S. Department of Energy decided weeks ago to say that they will go from 4% of the U.S. energy generation coming from solar to 45%. So it means really a lot of investment, and indeed the public money, private money will be needed to reach that. And I'm sure that all the work of the new administration and the Congress do it. And when you hear about what is the IPCC has released in August, the sixth report, when they say that we have a budget for a carbon budget for 10 years, not more. Otherwise, we will have more catastrophe and more impact on the earth. I think it's time new project to push the fossil fuel as much as possible.
Thanks, Patrick. Malcolm, we'd love to hear from you.
Thanks, Lisa. I'm Malcolm Wolf. I am President and CEO of the National Hydropower Association. Our mission is to champion water power as America's premier carbon-free renewable resource. We represent all forms of water power. That includes traditional reservoir hydro, pumped storage reservoirs, distributed hydro, and a lot of exciting new technologies in the marine energy space, tidal energy and wave energy, et cetera. So a lot of really interesting technologies in the water power sector. Collectively, we provide power to about 30 million American homes and businesses. I love, first of all, the topic, the name of this session, Energy is Infrastructure. The very first hydro facility I ever saw was in Lake Bisbee, Minnesota, and it had been operating since 1910, and it is still providing clean energy to the residents of Minnesota today. So when we think about infrastructure, just like bridges and roads, energy projects really shape communities, power communities. They're a critical part of infrastructure. Hydropower's principal priority is really to elevate our voice and be part of the clean energy solution. From our perspective, there's no way you can solve climate change without hydropower being part of that solution. For starters, in the United States, we provide, there's 80 gigawatts of reservoir hydro and over 20 gigawatts of pumped storage. So together, that's 100 gigawatts of capacity of carbon-free generation, and we don't want to go backwards and lose that generation. We also view ourselves as a force multiplier. We're the renewable resource that integrates other renewables. We have the ability to kind of turn on a moment when the sun stops shining, when the wind stops blowing. So we can really help with grid integration. We also provide a lot of reliability services that to some extent we take for granted now because we do have a lot of fossil generation on the grid. But as we transition to a cleaner energy grid, we're going to need resources for black start capability, for spinning reserves, for inertia. These are our reliability services that we don't really compensate today, but are going to be essential for a future grid. And there is huge potential for hydropower in this country, even using existing infrastructure. Without building new dams, we're able to add 50 gigawatts of new generation just using the 97% of dams that don't currently produce any generation or power, as well as new closed loop pump storage. So we're excited about hydropower's role in a 21st century clean energy grid.
Well, thanks to all of you. That was a terrific opening. And I'm now going to go to each one of you in turn with a more specific question. But just to highlight a couple things that I heard in your opening, I think it's really important what you said, Stacy, to be thinking about what's happening behind the meter and how energy efficiency and other things that we're doing more at the localized level can make an impact, and they add up. And right now we need everything. And then Malcolm, just picking up what you were saying about really pinning down why energy resources are infrastructure. And again, we're at a critical time. So I'm really looking forward to the rest of our conversation. John, I'm going to go back to you with the first question in this round robin here. You mentioned some of the unique features of public power, and in particular, your large public power members. Given that utilities are tasked with balancing reliability, affordability, and environmental stewardship, how can climate and clean energy proposals provide designs that best accommodate that balancing act and also, kind of continue to function as our backbone infrastructure?
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. I think, it's very interesting because as we make this transition, as you mentioned, we do have to balance reliability and affordability, and that looks very different um, regionally. So I think we come at it more from not focusing so much on resources, but on resource attributes. Malcolm mentioned it. I think Stacy mentioned the importance of a loading order and doing efficiency first. So I think at one time there's a discussion that it's all about one resource or two resources. To me, it's all about all of it. I don't think you're going to make significant impacts in reducing emissions unless you have a way to integrate everything and actually make some of those regional differences strengths. I think having a complementary portfolio is still very, very important. And again, I think if we subtract certain resources in favor of others, it actually makes things more complicated. I would say for us, we're fortunate. Our membership, we have Northwest members rich in hydro. We have members in the Southwest that have natural gas and wind. We have members that are in the Northeast with offshore wind. And we even have members in Florida that may opt to do something in nuclear, but also do a lot with efficiency and other behind the meter services first that are aggregated. So I think the best thing that policymakers can do is give us clarity on the outcomes, but allow flexibility regionally so that we can again balance and optimize the portfolio options that are available regionally, and also make sure that at the end of the day, we're making significant reductions in emissions.
This is a question for Patrick. I wanted to build on John's comments. What can be done to advance more clean energy infrastructure from your perspective?
Yeah, the main challenge in the future, I think there are two main challenges. The first one is to have stable permitting process where you know that when you are developing a project, and you are developing a project not easily, but the right way to respect the environment, respect the community, make the right consultation. At the end, as a permittee, you will get your permit, and you will be valid like an infrastructure for a very long period, because it's the way to reduce the cost of electricity and the cost of energy. That's one thing. The second thing, and we spoke about a little bit, is the fact that you need to have demand and supply balance every time in real time for electricity. You don't have, yes, you have some way to store it, but it's not the way the system is working. So you need to have this demand response, to have the transport. You need to have the diversified production, and so by increasing the infrastructure of transport, by facilitating the investment in storage with a specific investment tax credit in storage, which is under discussion but not yet approved. That will also help the system to stay alive and the light to stay on. Production that will depend from natural resource. So I think that's the way we think we have to do it. And if you look, for example, to in the 90s, the first decision to go and to give some for 2010 and then 2020 and then no 2030, but as an investor, you are developing something that will get real when you get permitted, and that you will be economically viable if you develop it correctly. So I think that's what we need, and that's what the reduce pollution and reduce greenhouse gas emission.
Thanks, Patrick. We're going to get into a discussion about legislative and, regulatory actions that are underway. But one comment that you made that I think is very important and speaks to some of the work that's happening at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. As our audience and our panelists are likely aware, they're embarking on a new electric transmission reform discussion. But one of the key points that I keep hearing is that we need to be focused both on our short term, but especially our longer term goals and looking at this very holistically. So I think, Patrick, you raised a number of those points in your comments, and I appreciate that. So next, I'm going to go to Malcolm Wolf. And Malcolm, I want to make sure you can hear me.
I can.
Okay, good. So let's talk a little bit more about hydropower, because in many ways, our country's electricity system was built on hydropower. And we could go all the way back to the Industrial Revolution, to World War II. I just want to know, from your perspective, having recently become the CEO and president, how do you see hydropower in the 21st century clean energy grid?
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. I think there is a growing recognition among many policymakers that hydropower is essential to a clean energy grid. You simply are not going to get enough gigawatts of clean renewable energy, and you're not going to have the flexibility in the system without hydropower to integrate all of those renewables. But what I don't think many people have recognized is that that hydropower's kind of future is uncertain. We've got about 30% of the fleet is up for relicensing over the next decade. The Department of Energy has just finalized or about to finalize a report, and I understand they've concluded that the average relicensing takes about 8 years for a hydropower facility. That's longer than it takes to license a nuclear power plant. For licensing an existing facility, it's about $3.5 million on average just for the paperwork. And typically there's tens of millions of dollars in upgrades or other measures that are required. So we have about 13 gigawatts of carbon-free generation that is at risk over the next decade if we don't do something to encourage it. From an NHA perspective, we've got three top policy priorities. First, we need parity with other carbon-free technologies, whether that's in a clean energy standard or in the tax code. I will note that I'm disappointed in what the House of Representatives passed last week, or the various committees passed. There are incentives for carbon-free nuclear that exists, but nothing for hydro. Similarly, there are long-term extensions of tax credits for wind and solar, which are great, but hydropower only gets half the value. So there's no reason, if you're going to value carbon-free resources, to discriminate between those resources. We should have parity so that it doesn't create an unfair playing field. We also need relicensing reform for the reasons I mentioned, and market valuation reform. If we do need flexibility in the system, if we do need reliability attributes, if we do value carbon-free attributes, those attributes need to be paid for. And right now, they're not. The good news, and this will be my final point, is that I think we're getting increasing support on these issues. We've recently formed a coalition with a number of unusual allies. American Rivers and World Wildlife Federation and Union of Concerned Scientists have joined us, along with dam safety advocates, to try to advance what we're calling the 3 Rs. We want to rehabilitate dams that have safety issues. We want to retrofit dams that could be where you could add new generation to existing dams. If you've got the infrastructure, let's generate power. And this isn't easy for the hydropower industry to say, but we recognize that many dams no longer serve a role. So dam removal, particularly of non-power dams, is important when they no longer serve a purpose. So there is bipartisan, bicameral legislation pending in Congress. And we hope that Congress enacts the 21st Century Dam Act, because we think it would go a long way to advancing all three of those objectives. I'll leave it there.
Yeah, no, that was very thorough, but a lot to unpack. So I may come back to you when we're on the policy conversation to go into that in a little more detail. But
Please.
Yes, I think you and John both raised good points about the need for, parity among different, corporate or utility structures. We need a technology inclusive approach to our policies, especially at the federal level. So there's a lot that we can do in this moment, and I hope that those messages continue to get out. So Stacey, I'd love to go to you next. And in your opening, you talked a good amount about PACE, which is terrific. And it's amazing to think about the evolution of that program, how much it's growing, and how the uptake and scale has expanded. Yeah, I was wondering if you could talk about a little bit more about what you think the challenges that the PACE program addresses, and how does that work with private and public dollars? Is there a leverage opportunity here? And that's something we really need to be focused on as well, because we do have limited resources when it comes to federal investment. And anytime the public sector spends money, we really should be looking at how we can leverage the private sector. So thanks, Stacey.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. That's a really, really important point, I think. So as I mentioned, PACE helps to fund distributed behind the meter energy efficiency and renewables. So rooftop solar, energy efficient HVAC, LED lighting, insulation, cool roofing, the whole spectrum of energy efficiency, which can significantly reduce the stress on the existing grid infrastructure. We also fund climate resiliency, so wildfire protection, water conservation, hurricane and severe climate hardening, flood mitigation, sea level rise. And what we find is that in each of the states where PACE is enabled, the legislation will typically include components that are really relevant to the local setting. So if it's in Florida, flood, hurricane mitigation and flood and sea level rise resiliency are really on top of mind. Those are included in the PACE statute. Similarly, wildfire was just added in California. So the benefits of PACE on the demand side is that we provide low-cost capital, 100% financing. We overcome that upfront cost barrier to make these distributive improvements and make them easy and affordable. There are over 100 million buildings in the US, and most of them will need deep energy retrofits to reduce the demand and strain on our grid. Many of them will need climate resiliency retrofits, and that the dollars required will be in the trillions. So to your point about leverage, PACE is one of the most effective public policies that I've seen capable of delivering private capital to leverage public funds and incentives and all the policies that we may be talking about kind of at a broader scale. But PACE actually brings in the private capital to fund the distributed upgrades that I'm talking about. And at the end of the day, I feel like we have a lot of the technologies, probably many or most of the technologies we need. We have many of the innovative policies, but what we need to do is invest in making them happen. And it's the investment speed and scale that's really one of the biggest challenges to reaching our climate goals. So I believe that PACE is one of the policies that can bring that scale capital from the private sector, leveraging the structure of PACE, where essentially the property owner pays it back on their property tax bill. That's a very secure repayment mechanism that is attractive to public providers like pension funds and insurance companies who need long-lived assets to match their long-lived liabilities. It's a great tool on the capital markets, and it provides the scale resource we need to amplify the public funds that are going towards our clean energy future.
Thank you, Stacey. So now I'd like to talk a little bit more about policy, and in particular, federal policy. So we'll go back around again, probably starting with John. Can you speak a little bit about the federal and state policies that would be most impactful from your perspective to deploy rapidly and affordably? And are any of these included in either the bipartisan infrastructure framework or the reconciliation package that's under negotiation right now? So John, we'll start with you.
Yeah, sure. I think that there are actually policies in both that are of interest to us. I mean, first of all, start with electrification. That's a natural extension of our distribution grids, and we stand ready to serve as fuel providers as the nation moves to more transportation electrification. There's a lot in both proposals relative to grid modernization, which is very important for both resilience and to accommodate greater digitization and greater interoperability within the grid. I think that, the tax area, which is probably a little arcane for some folks, but very important for us. There are proposals to provide a direct pay option, which is for municipal issue is very, very important. There's proposals to restore advanced refunding, which is the ability to take our municipal issuances and refinance them when the circumstances warrant it. There are some things that we would have liked to seen help on that we didn't get help on. One was our members during the 2009 2011 issued some $14 billion of Build America bonds when we were doing ARA funding and that big infrastructure push then, only to have those become subject to sequestration after the fact. So that was kind of a unpleasant haircut to get after the deal was already struck. And that, well, on a going forward basis, there's proposals to have some of these new direct pay options be sequestration proof. We still have the hangover from the sequestration that was imposed from previously issued. So there's a lot in there that I think is very helpful in supporting our objectives. Focus on transmission as well. You mentioned what's going on at FERC with a real focus on transmission. And I will say, to Malcolm's point, siting and permitting improvements are going to be critically important to meet some of the goals that have been outlined. If you think about trying to achieve the types of ambitious goals by 2030 and 2035, when, as we sit here today, a transmission line is likely to take more than a decade to get sited and permitted, and perhaps even some renewable projects, I'm not certain. But in my past life, when I was at SMUD and CEO there, we did undertake a hydro relicensing that took 12 years. So we were just above the 8-year average. So some of those things have to be complementary, I would say. And hopefully those enabling types of legislature, that they're not involved, if they're not within the packages being considered now, need to come along quickly to make sure that we can get projects financed, permitted, and sited, and get on the path as quickly as possible.
Thanks, John. Patrick, I'd love to hear your perspective at this point. So welcome you to build on what John was discussing.
I totally agree with what John just said, and I don't want to repeat it but I want to take another, I think there is another, this is what is called TCFD and what will be discussed in the COP26 in some days in Glasgow, and the fact that companies, investors, pension funds will have to disclose their exposure to climate change and their exposure to what the value at the end of their assets and what they are managing. And this, I think, should create a flow of money in the right direction, and for two reasons. Not only the right direction because it's good for the planet and the environment, the right direction in terms of protecting of the people who are investing in this pension fund. And so the disclosure of the risk, because climate change is a drink, but it's also a financial risk. It's not just a risk for the people in the street. It's not just a health risk. It's not just a risk for birds and animals and all those things. It's a risk it's an economic risk for companies and for people. When you are the owner of a house and the area is loaded or burned and nobody wants to insure your house anymore, what is the value of your house after that? It's dramatic for you, but and really, I think, for example, and I hope COP26 will push all the economy to do this, to disclose more the risk of climate change and how you manage to protect your company with that. And I'm sure that sustainable business, like all of our sector, energy efficiency, small hydro, wind and solar, utility scale, offshore wind and all those things will be supported by that and have access to a lower capital. This is, today if you raise a green bond, the spread with a green bond with a bond which is not green is not big. It's not big. Should be bigger because the lender take less risk with a company which is green and sustainable.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. The Securities and Exchange Commission in the United States, under new leadership, of course, through the Biden administration, launched a information gathering process this spring, and the Business Council, as well as I'm sure many participants in National Clean Energy Week, A, took note, and 2, participated and shared their perspectives, because market transparency is essential, and all of our businesses are not always well understood to the investor community. So I certainly am optimistic that this process will be beneficial along the lines of the benefits that you described, Patrick. So thank you for that. Stacey, I'd love to come back to you, understanding that you're involved largely in state implemented programs, but either sharing state policies or how they connect with the federal conversation underway. These bills are anticipated to give significant amount of funds to states to implement a range of programs. And I don't know actually if they connect directly with PACE yet, but maybe some of these funds might help states who want to implement PACE or maybe want to expand PACE. Love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, great. And there's certainly policies both at the federal and state level that I think will help advance our efforts in the distributed space. So policies that incentivize property owners to invest in energy efficiency, renewables, water conservation, natural disaster resiliency are all very important to us. There's really 4 key areas that we've been looking at or that we keep track of. So the first is the solar ITC. The extension of the solar investment tax credit will definitely have a positive impact on incentivizing more investment in distributed solar systems. This is a critical policy area for renewables and also one that PACE helps finance. The second area is around energy storage, and I think it'll be really interesting to see what policies can impact positively, either incentives, tax or otherwise, to advance the storage market. It's clearly going to have a big role to play in our long-term energy future, and we foresee PACE being a critical part to deploying storage across hundreds of or thousands of local communities. But like many similar technologies, there's an upfront cost, and thus financing mechanisms that can provide an opportunity to overcome that hurdle or barrier are going to be a crucial part of it to get storage at scale. The third area that we really focus on is climate resiliency, as I mentioned. And so the resiliency and weatherization investments in the bipartisan infrastructure package are something we've been tracking quite closely. We are also, as an industry, still really interested in the Shelter Act. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that, but it would have created a tax incentive or a tax credit incentive structure similar to solar for natural disaster resiliency. For retrofits like wind hardening or fire resistant materials or fire barriers, et cetera. And so we still think that's a key piece of the infrastructure picture that needs to be added into folks' thinking, both at the state and the federal level. And then finally, I would speak to electric vehicles. So the electric vehicle charging infrastructure investment in the bipartisan infrastructure package is something we're paying a lot of attention to. We haven't yet seen much investment in that area using PACE, although we do have some projects. So it's an eligible improvement, and we're very interested to see more incentives and or other policies that promote the adoption of electric vehicles and charging infrastructure that we can help deploy and bring capital to advancing those efforts.
Yes, thanks, Stacey. I mean, there's so much in these 2 pieces of legislation, and we're still in the midst of the negotiation on the reconciliation package. So we all need to be watching that very closely. So Malcolm, just closing out this part of the policy conversation, anything you want to add?
I'd like to echo, I think, all the comments made by my fellow panelists. Patrick, in particular, your comments about the need for investment certainty is very true in the hydro sector. We're making long-term investments. These last for literally generations. The average hydro facility in this country is over 60 years old and still going strong. So some kind of investment certainty is important. Parity, as I talked about earlier, is also critically important. We need to be treating all forms of carbon-free technology equally. I'm really pleased that in the reconciliation bill, there is a long-term extension, a 10-year extension of the tax credit for renewables, which I think is great. We are working with friends on Capitol Hill to bump up hydro, so we're included at the same rate as all other renewables. Likewise, we're really encouraged that in the reconciliation bill, they included a 30% investment tax credit for new storage. As we do have more wind and solar on the grid, we are going to need to balance out those variable resources. So more storage is going to be critical. That does include pump storage. So we're excited about that. We're pleased that there's a credit in at least the House package in reconciliation to preserve carbon-free nuclear assets. We think that's part of the future. And we're going to continue working to get something similar on the hydro side. The 21st Century Dam Act that I mentioned earlier isn't as broad. It focuses only on investments in those 3 Rs, rehabilitating existing dams, retrofitting ones where you can add generation or removal. But we think that would be a powerful piece. We're also encouraged that the Act includes some kind of carbon energy. It's not a clean energy standard, it's a clean energy program. But we think that is useful. Again, the devil's in the details, and we have to make sure that we are treating all resources, carbon-free resources, equally. So if the goal is to have a 100% carbon-free grid, then we need to treat new and existing resources the same and not inadvertently penalize early movers or existing carbon-free generation. A lot of work to be done on relicensing and market reform. That work is probably outside of Congress, but a lot of opportunities there as well. I know we're short on time,
Thanks,
so I will leave it there.
Yeah, okay. Really appreciate all of this. And I just wanted to, just ask everybody if they, have some closing thoughts. I see we have, about 5 minutes left, and I wanted to explore a little bit more on research, development, and deployment to the extent that's something people would like to discuss. I mean, clearly that's a big part of implementing the Energy Act that was enacted last year. A lot of those elements are in the bipartisan infrastructure framework, but if you'd like to talk about something else, you're more than welcome. So why don't I start with John?
Yeah, just real quickly, I think it's critically important. We've done a lot of work with the national labs and with the Department of Energy, and the biggest assistance we need is probably commercializing new technologies. There's a lot of work and a lot of enthusiasm about storage, but it still has a ways to go in terms of getting it to scale and getting it to the right pricing. And it's probably going to be one of the most important attributes in the entire system. And so additional focus and support on all types of storage, I think, would be really helpful.
Thanks. Patrick, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I think the main point is again the stability of the system, of the electricity system, because we really need electricity. I think one point we didn't touch on, because I'm confident about research and development. One thing which is important is that this energy transition should be reducing inequality and not increasing inequality. And when I'm thinking about this, it's job transition. We have not spoken about this point, but I think it's very important to not to just invest in the young people who are just going out of university and having the right degree, but also the people who are working in the coal industry, the people who are working in other fossil fuel industry like gas, and give them a way to go to the different industry we're representing today. And I think that's an important point. And the other point we have not touched on is the market. The market has been designed for not for hydro, solar, or wind, where the investment is important and the marginal cost is very small. This is the reason why nuclear is a problem today. It's the same. The marginal cost is small. Has been designed for gas, and then we have to think about how to change the market, and I think to make the new electricity economy viable more and give visibility on the long term.
Thanks. And yes, we're going to need a whole other session to talk about jobs, but I think you raise a very good point. And in these bills, there is attention to helping transition workers as well as bring on the workforce that we need as we deploy. So thank you for raising that. Stacy.
Yeah, so at Y-Green, we're sort of technology agnostic, but what I can say is that we see a vast array of very powerful and efficacious technologies. And that, from our perspective, it's about the deployment and the financing and the capital availability for those technologies. So I would be remiss if I didn't add on to my previous comments about policy that we encourage more states to enact PACE enabling legislation precisely for that reason, to leverage public funds with private dollars. And as I mentioned, 34 states have done so, but there are a handful left to adopt and to expand their programs to cover these critical infrastructure areas to make sure that the capital availability flows with the policy and the technology innovations that we have.
Thanks. And Malcolm, back to you.
Thanks, Lisa. I guess I'll make two closing comments. The first, I think the energy industry, the energy sector needs to do a much better job to make our own workforce look like the customers we serve. There's a long way to go, and I think that's a critical part in improving diversity, improving the quality of what we provide. The second thought that I want to share is simply follow the money. That's how investment decisions are going to be made. That's how billions of dollars get kind of shifted as quickly as we moved, from coal to gas and from gas to clean energy resources. But the market structures are designed based on older technologies, as others have said. So I think updating those market design is going to be a critical part if we're going to reach our goals.
Well, thank you. And it just points again to our theme. Energy is infrastructure, and infrastructure takes alignment from the community level to what the private sector can do, what governments can do. And, we all need to be working together because these are big investments and they're critical that they happen affordably and very, very quickly. So I look forward to having future conversations at the 2022 National Clean Energy Week with all of you once these major pieces of legislation have passed and we can talk about how they're being implemented. So again, thanks to the organizers of National Clean Energy Week and thanks to all the panelists today.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you,
Thank
Lisa.
you.
We are a society that values cleanliness. We sanitize, bleach, scrub, wash our dogs, brush our teeth. Yeah, we love our teeth. We just plain feel better when we're clean. The same is true for the world we live in. We all want and deserve clean air, clean water, and clean energy. And we're already making progress. Today, almost 40% of the electricity that powers our homes and businesses comes from clean, carbon-free sources. With new technologies and the right policies, a 100% clean energy future is possible for all of us. America's electric companies are committed to getting the energy we provide as clean as we can, as fast as we can, without compromising reliability or affordability. For us, the path forward is clear. The path forward is clean.
It makes sense to me, even as a banker, to run the financing through the Y Green program rather than through my local bank or credit union.
Y Green has benefited our family because it's given us the resources to make the home improvements that we need to make.
It is an opportunity. It does give you access.
Our AC unit was not working. This is where Y Green came in. It offered flexible financing terms, didn't require that big payment up front.
Customer service at Y Green was awesome. They made time, so I did understand the terms of the contract. Had I not gotten my roof financed through Y Green, I probably would have buckets sitting everywhere.
We're older, retired, our income is fixed. We have to plan our money, and as a result, we've benefited greatly from what your company did for us. Y Green has been there. If I called them, they responded immediately. I was surprised at how genuine they were. I felt like they really cared.
Natural gas utilities invest $3.9 million per day into energy efficiency. These programs work, and carbon dioxide emissions from the average natural gas home have declined 1.2% per year. Safety upgrades to our pipelines have also reduced emissions by 73%.
How can we find the best climate solutions? We look for a light, one bright enough to inspire us all to work together. Right now, America's natural gas and oil companies continue to lower emissions worldwide, all while fulfilling essential energy needs. Together, we can keep the U.S. the world leader in reducing emissions. See how American innovation lights the way at energyforprogress.org.
Why is Quebec a partner of choice when it comes to decarbonizing the global economy and protecting the environment? For starters, we take action. We already have one of the lowest per capita GHG emission rates in North America. And we're one of the first governments to introduce carbon pricing into our economy. We aim to be fully carbon neutral by 2050. We've got energy, and that's a well-known fact. It just comes naturally to us. With 62 hydropower stations, we can proudly say the energy we produce is over 99% clean. We're also plugged into the future. Our business know-how, state-of-the-art research centers, and competitive energy and operating costs make us the ideal place to fast-track the development of the all-electric vehicle industry. Plus, we're experts at conducting business and electricity. In exporting our hydroelectricity, we intend to help our North American partners achieve their climate objectives. Next, we're a tight-knit global community. Our actions surpass our borders. Through our International Climate Cooperation Program, we transfer clean technology to the most vulnerable countries and help them adapt to climate change. Thanks to our government offices around the world and our involvement in various international organizations, we're building solid partnerships for a sustainable future. We can go the distance. We have export-ready green technologies, an innovation ecosystem, and the expertise to partner with you in building tomorrow's economy. And last but not least, we're plugged into our biggest resource. We know that building a sustainable future requires both will and expertise. Together, let's put our energy into fighting climate change. What are you waiting for? Quebec awaits.